Hello there. So this week has been a challenging week from a physical perspective. A bit sick for most of it, so kind of wiped out. Didn't get to release a live show on Tuesday night that I planned, or the 864 on Wednesday, or a new show today. But I did want to do something I see other podcasters do when they don't have a new show or 3 shows every week, and it's a rebroadcast. So I was thinking about what show to put out that was released in season 1, and I decided to go with this one. It's with Colin OBrady. It is one of my favourites from the first season. Great story. So check it out. I hope you enjoy it, and back to normal service next week with some new shows. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend. Good luck.
Hi there, and welcome to another edition of the 1% Better podcast with your host, Rob O'Donoghue.
Hey folks, this is another episode of the 1% Better podcast, and I am delighted to introduce Colin OBrady. So Colin's an American pro endurance athlete, but I think more importantly a 2-time world record holder for the Explorers Grand Slam and 7 Summits. So Colin, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
So, Colin, my first question, I want to dive straight in. What part of you is Irish? 100% Irish, or with a name like Colin OBrady, we have to claim you?
Yeah. You know, I've got some Irish roots. Goes back several generations though. So my family's been in North America for quite some time. But believe it or not, my last name is actually a composite of my parents' last name. So my dad is an O'Connor and my mom is a Brady. And when they were hippies in the 80s when I was born, they combined their last names to give me O'Brady. So, but both were Irish in descent. So yeah, Irish Catholic parents and grandparents and whatnot. And I have been over to Ireland as well. So hopefully I'm not one of those annoying American tourists that comes and knocks on your guys' door and thinks that they're related to all of you. But
no, but
I do have some roots over there.
No, that's cool. And you know, I don't know if you know. So I'm O'Donoghue is my second name. So we share the O part. Have you ever heard the story about the O and the famine in Ireland back in the?
I don't. No.
Do you want me to tell it to you now? Or
yeah.
Okay.
Give me the quick history lesson.
Okay, so this is a story that I heard not too long ago, actually, but. You know the time, the famine times in the 1840s and 50s in Ireland, and Irish names typically with the O very much stands out as being Irish. And when there was soup kitchens in Ireland at the time, I think they were run by the British, and they were being selective to give out soup and give out food. So they were saying if you were willing to drop the O, they would give you soup. So the statement was, they gave up their O for the soup. So then obviously you still have an O, I still have an O. So obviously we got through that somehow without the soup. But maybe that's where your extra endurance comes into play. That your ancestors had that ability to
a little more extra grit.
Exactly, push through. So no, that's cool. Good to know we can claim you, and that we, as a somewhat Irish, and take those records under an Irish flag as well. So that's good.
There you go.
One question I like to ask people: what's your kind of earliest memory? And sometimes it's interesting to see that memory sometimes ties into stuff they maybe do later in life. Does anything spring out when you think about an early memory?
That's a good question. I like that. I don't think I've been asked that question before.
That's good. I'm hoping. I know I'm going to ask you some questions you've been asked before. So any original ones would be good.
I like that. What initially popped into my mind when you said that was a very early memory of probably, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years old, playing in my backyard at my not the house that I grew up in. I know that it was at least 3 or younger, because when I was 3 we moved to a different house. So it's this house in the neighborhood in Portland, Oregon, where I grew up. And I'm just like playing outside, running around outside. So maybe, I don't know, if we look deeper into that, maybe that was the beginnings of me just loving being outside and being free to move my body.
Yeah, no, I think that's cool. I'm trying to do a bit of a study into people's early memories and see if there's a correlation to what they do later in life. So maybe that's, you're on the right track there. And then I guess from that on, how quickly did it become clear to you that you were really interested in sport? I know from reading a bit about you, soccer was a big thing for you in your early years, and swimming, obviously.
Yeah. I was my mom would say I was a hyperactive kid. And for me, sports was always an outlet that I really loved. I think she started putting me in competitive sports when I was, 4 or 5 years old. And she jokes that the reason that I ended up in swimming and soccer rather than, baseball or some of the other more traditional American sports is she was looking for the sports where I literally never stopped moving so that I would be the most tired when I got home from practice or a game or a race or something like that. So swimming certainly fit the bill of that, just a constant exercise, and soccer for the most part as well. So yeah. It was pretty, I loved sports from a young age, and I excelled at them at a very young age as well. My parents, neither are huge athletes, although my dad's quite athletic. He didn't, play sports at a later age or anything like that beyond high school age, but just loved it. Always loved it from the second I was a kid, identified as an athlete ever since I was really young. And obviously that's taken me up until my adulthood where, here I am as a professional athlete. So it's been a fun journey with sport for sure.
Cool. And you touched on the parents being neither of them specific athletes. That's something I was kind of wondering about. Was there something running in the family there when you were being identified in those early years as an athlete? Was there one or two major mentors that kind of that stood out when you look back that really encouraged you, promoted you to move forward?
Yeah, I had actually about around the same age, actually, 10, 11, 12, 13, sort of early teenage years, adolescence. I was swimming and playing soccer both at a high level at this point. So I don't know how it is in Ireland, but you're kind of around that age in the U.S. Kids start to sort of specialize in one sport or the other, particularly if you're playing at a high level. And I had a soccer coach at the time and a swim coach at the time who were both hugely influential when I'm looking back. Not only did it's weird because they definitely encouraged me to play their respective sport without taking break to play the other one. They wanted me to go full time, but they also allowed me the freedom to do both. And ultimately, I'm a big believer that particularly even at that age, specialization has its merits, but I also think it leads to burnout. And for me, it was great to be able to continue on to play both until I ended up in college. I swam in college, but where it's really hard to play both. But they were huge mentors for me, not just on the field, just kind of in life, also around that same period of time. My parents divorced, which ultimately was a very amicable situation and it's not like a huge hardship in my life in the long run. But having some other sort of mentors and adult figures really kind of mentoring me through that phase of my life, in the field of sport definitely had a great impact in my life. So yeah.
Soccer at the time, I suppose, like you're 32, so soccer was becoming quite big. Had the MLS kind of started in your early years? Was that something you were drawn towards? I guess maybe 10 or 20 years previously, it wouldn't have been seen maybe as the cooler sport to be in the US?
Yeah, certainly MLS is, getting bigger and bigger in the United States. Portland, where I'm from, sells out the stadium every single game. People are on their feet singing and cheering. And, you might think you're in Europe when you're in a game in Portland, which is very rare in the United States when it comes to soccer, obviously. Yeah. But soccer has always been a huge sort of participation sport in the U.S., even though it hasn't been as sort of loved in the professional sense and compared to NFL or NBA or something like that. But it was interesting. When I look back now, if I had been a kid playing soccer right now, I think that eyeing the MLS or a professional track would have been a dream of mine. At the time when I was a kid, that didn't really seem like a real path the same way it would be now, if that makes sense. And so I wasn't sort of drawn one way or another in terms of the long term of it. But I love playing soccer, and soccer is huge in the U.S. even when I was a kid. At least for youth sports, it's massive. Yeah.
Portland Timbers, is it? Is that their team?
Yeah, exactly. Portland Timbers.
Because I think there's one or two Irish guys that played with them not so long ago, or maybe there was.
Yeah.
Is there?
Yeah, there's God, what's the guy's name? I'll think of it in a second. I'm blanking on it.
That's okay.
He's injured right now.
Right.
But he's very good. Yeah, no, we've got some great players. We won the MLS Cup 2 years ago, which was actually I took a Timbers flag with me to the summit, each of the 7 summits in the North and South Pole. We had just won the championship, and I wanted to represent some hometown pride. So I've got some great shots of me with the timber scarf on the summit of Mount Everest and the North Pole and the South Pole and all that kind of stuff. And it was cool. They honored me on the field with the team after I returned with my world record. So yeah,
Awesome.
I've got a lot of love for the Timbers and the sport of soccer in general.
Cool.
Liam Ridgewell. Is
Liam
he
Ridgewell.
Irish?
No, he's an English guy, I think.
British,
Or maybe he's Welsh, maybe, but I know the name.
Okay.
Yeah. He's a defender, I think, isn't he?
Yeah. Good player.
When you were training hard, for the swimming and for the soccer, were you always like jumping out of bed in the morning to do it? Did you find it challenging? Was there kind of parts where you were completely focused on it, positive, or was there tough times? Do you remember?
I loved playing games and I loved swimming in the races, so I loved the competing aspect of it. I wasn't one for the practice quite as much, which is funny to look back on now. It's not that I didn't have the work ethic. I was just kind of like, oh, why are we doing these drills? Like, well, let's just race or let's just play the game. And fortunate for me, I suppose, I was blessed with quite a bit of natural athletic talent from a young age, so I was able to kind of get by without that sort of hard practice. But as I obviously move forward as a professional athlete, and that obviously I highly value the hard hours of work and dedication that it takes to get to a truly world-class level in sport. But at a young age, I was kind of always a little bit frustrated with the whole process, if you will. So that was kind of somewhat of a struggle for me. I was kind of impatient in a lot of things in my life. The same thing, in school. I always ended up getting good grades, but I hated always doing like the stupid homework assignments. I was like, I know the material. Like, well, can I just take the test, or can I, just that kind of stuff. I just was, I don't know, impatient, I suppose.
Impatience, yeah. No, I hear it. And when, so maybe me talking about college, you went to Yale, specialised in swimming, I suppose. I know you did an economics degree there, right? So, but during the college years, did the dedication or focus remain, or were you did you get into college life at all? How did that work out?
Oh yeah, as you're probably aware, collegiate sports in the United States particularly is pretty serious business. It's not professional sport in terms of you're getting paid, although you can have scholarships and whatnot. But there's in a lot of ways in terms of hours spent, I was swimming more than I was actually in school and class. But it was a good balance between, Yale was an incredible education, got, economics degree, which is, served me well throughout the rest of my life and will continue to, as well as the swimming. You can't really, at that point, when you're a collegiate Division I athlete, there's no kind of hiding from the dedication that's required. It's either you're going to do it or you're not going to make it. They're going to kick you off the team. So, I had to step it up. But there was times when, I think every swimmer, it's funny, you talk to most swimmers, it's a love-hate, that sport. Most of us, of course, love and the dedication, the racing and whatnot, but it's a hard sport. Day in and day out, you're training 4 to 5 hours a day, looking at the black line on the bottom of a swimming pool, going back and forth. Like, it's a little bit, and it's not so social. So it's not like you're playing a team sport where you're also like kind of talking with your buddies in between plays or whatnot. Like, you're just got your head under the water, grinding day in and day out. So I don't think there's a single swimmer out there that hasn't experienced some of the hardships or the downside of that. But that said, I think it's probably the best sport to prepare you for not only having incredible aerobic endurance, which has served me really well in my life, but also to have sort of that grit and perseverance and, kind of being able to be in your own head and kind of quiet that negative self-talk that we all battle with at times and whatnot. So it was a great, I feel blessed that swimming was a huge part of my life, although there were moments certainly. But in terms of college life, I've always been a super social guy. So for me, I've always had to kind of work hard, play hard mentality. I was, work, like I said, I always got good grades in school. I ended up at Yale, which is, a wonderful university. And I was swimming at a high level, but I also was hanging out, having a good time, going out with buddies. And that's always been something that I've tried to, balance out. And of course, at times it hasn't quite fit perfectly with my lifestyle. But I think balance is important for sure.
Yeah, that sounds it. And just on the swimming piece, like meditation is something I talk about on this show a good bit, mindfulness, and I believe that there's a million ways to be meditative and mindful. Would you have realized even at the time when you were getting into that discipline and focusing on the black line, hour after hour, that it was a form of meditation kind of?
It's funny. Meditation is a huge part of my life now. In 2011, I was exposed to Vipassana meditation and went to a 10-day silent, no reading, no writing, silent retreat. And I have now done that almost every year since 2011 and brought Vipassana meditation a daily practice in my life. But of course, we're talking about my collegiate years or swimming years. I graduated from university in 2006. So that was long before I was, exposed to meditation in that pure of a form in terms of a discipline. But when I look back, certainly I was meditating, or, reaching these flow states while swimming, and not even kind of realizing it. It's interesting, there's a weird headspace you get into in swimming where you're doing a typical workout set, as it's called, would be like, 20 times 100 at, whatever interval. So maybe I'm just going to throw some random numbers out. 20 times 100 meters at 130. So you're maybe touching on 110, taking 20 seconds rest and pushing off the next one. And it's so repetitive, right? Because you're swimming back and forth in this pool that it's so often that, you lose track of which one you're on. But I remember times where I'd be like, I'd touch the wall and I'd ask the guy I'm swimming, the next guy would say, are we on number 3 or are we on number 17? Like sometimes in my mind, I'd be so like kind of drifted off, but it's that when I look back, it's like this very present flow state of, pushing your body, being in that flow, being really focused on body and sensation of the body and all that sort of stuff. So when I look back, I think that there was a meditative practice, and it's interesting as meditation has become, like I said, a more specific part of my preparation and lifestyle. I look back on swimming and say, the discipline learned there, as well as being able to sit with myself quietly for long stretches of time every day, certainly aided me well. So not to say my first 10-day meditation retreat where I was thrown into 17 hours a day of meditation, no reading, no writing, no eye contact, isolation was easy by any stretch. But there was a part of me that was like, I've never meditated before, but this is somewhat familiar. And why is that? And I think that sport, and particularly swimming, really hones that skill.
Yeah, no, definitely. The 10-day one is something I'm gearing up to do myself.
Highly recommend for you and anyone else. It changed my life for sure.
Yeah. And like, I suppose could talk forever about that. But even in a nutshell, how quickly, even in those first few days of that 17 hours, did you really start to see the change? That the mind started to get quiet? Because some people, I know it's probably different for everybody, but maybe because you had already that experience, you got there quicker.
Yeah, maybe. It's interesting. So I've done, like I said, I've done several 10-day retreats now, and it's interesting. People say, "Oh, was the second one easier than the first? Was the third one easier than the second?" And they all are very different. And not in a linear sense in terms of, quieting the mind. There's times when I've gotten into a really pleasant meditative flow early on. There's times when it's taken me days and days to get there. There's times where I've kind of popped in and out of that. And of course, as you know from someone who knows meditation, that the whole purpose isn't to say, "Oh, I'm doing great at meditation today." It's sort of just like observing as it is. And so, it's never quite the same. And you can't help, of course, that sometimes be a little disappointed, like, "Oh, why am I not more focused or this?" But that kind of the whole point is to let that go and just to be present with what's coming up right in that moment. Yeah,
definitely. Do you listen to Sam Harris's podcasts at all? Do you know Sam Harris?
I have not. No.
He's from California. He talks about meditation. He talks about consciousness a lot, and he has a few books about waking up. One is called, and he's brilliant. He's very good, and he does guided meditations as well. Just an interesting guy to listen to.
I was on Dan Harris's podcast.
Yeah,
10% Happier.
And he was on Sam Harris's before as well.
Cool.
So yeah.
So it's
cool.
the same world for sure. But I love what those guys are doing.
Excellent. So college done, and I know, and from listening to your TED Talk, that's obviously where I was able to discover you and hear your great story. I'd love to maybe, if you could talk me through, once you finished college, you decided to go take a bit of a year out and travel the world a little bit.
Yeah, so I kind of, like I said, economics degree. At the end of college, I kind of thought my sporting career was over, as it often is in the United States after university, unless you're winning an Olympic medal, which I was, a high level swimmer, but not quite the next Michael Phelps. So
Right.
I decided, hey, I want to travel a little bit and see the world. I had been painting houses in the summer, so I had been always wanting to travel and see a bit more of the world. So I had been saving up to kind of go on a trip to see the world a bit before settling into my career, which I think maybe is a little bit more common in the UK with a gap year or whatnot, but and in Ireland, but it's pretty not super common in the United States, unfortunately. I think more people should do that in this country. But anyways, yeah. So I decided to travel around the world. Total shoestring budget. Backpack and a surfboard. Just hitchhiking most of the time, or getting by and sleeping in hostels and whatnot.
Did you go on your own?
Yeah, I was alone. Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Cool.
So I was in Fiji, and then New Zealand, and Australia, and then up through Southeast Asia, which is where I think you're probably going with this question, which is I ended up in Thailand, and unfortunately tragedy struck, and I was severely burned in a fire on a rural beach on a small island in the Gulf of Thailand, which ultimately certainly changed the trajectory of my lifestyle and life pretty significantly. I was caught on fire all the way to my neck. I was, doing a really smart activity, which was jumping a flaming jump rope, which sounds ridiculous, and it is ridiculous, of course. But if you've ever been to Thailand or Southeast Asia, it's actually fairly common, the amount of fire dancing and people participating in that.
Yeah.
And mostly, if the rope wraps around your legs or bumps off your legs, just kind of bumps off like a finger through a candle flame. But for me, that didn't happen. The rope wrapped around my legs, kerosene sprayed my whole body and lit me on fire to my neck. So I jumped in the ocean to extinguish the flames, which most certainly saved my life, but not before about 25% of my body was severely burned, predominantly my legs and feet. And I spent ultimately spent the next several months in various Thai hospitals, but the first week was really harsh. The island I was on didn't really have a hospital. I was driven down dirt path and one moped and one room nursing station where there was a cat running around my bed in the ICU for the next week as I underwent surgeries every single day to try to keep me alive, basically. And the scariest thing ultimately from the whole thing was that the doctors were telling me, hey, look, like, this is bad, but you're most likely never going to walk again normally in your life. And so kind of receiving that diagnosis, I think for anybody at any age is horrible, but particularly for me at 21, 22 years of age, having been an active, healthy person that's, kind of think of myself as an athlete or someone who's very mobile, and kind of on the precipice of adulthood, just leaving university, was a really kind of harsh diagnosis, and, kind of pushed me into a pretty deep depression, to be honest, at first.
And like when it happened, you were obviously on your own. For how long was it before you were even able to get in contact or in touch with family to let them know, or you were you feeling like completely isolated for that first while?
Yeah, so interesting, like small pieces of twists of fate kind of conspired and ultimately to really save me. One was I had been traveling by myself for months and months, and I had just met up with one of my childhood best friends, a guy named David Boyer, in Thailand just before this happened. Okay. So he was traveling over there. He actually was traveling with my sister at the time, and they're now married. So he's my brother-in-law as well, but they weren't at the time. But he was traveling there, and we had just met up a few days before this to travel for a couple weeks together. So fortunately for me, when I was actually burned, he was there right when it happened. So it was amazing to have, like I said, I'd been completely by myself for months and months out in the world. And then he, of course, got in touch with my parents pretty quickly. And at first, it's weird to say this, but at first, we didn't quite realize how bad it was. I mean, we knew it was really bad, but we were kind of like, we didn't know like how bad burns can be and the risk of infection. And we were both honestly like in very huge shock. I mean, he's looking at me having skin like falling off my legs. We're just kind of both out of it. I'm really out of it, obviously. Yeah. And so when he called home to my mom, he said, hey, there's been an accident. We're in this hospital, but we don't really know, give us a few days, like it might get better type of thing, which obviously it didn't. But she had this, motherly instinct, which she says like this mama bear type of instinct. And without hesitating at all, she got on the next plane to get over there, which ultimately takes, a long time to fly from the U.S. to Thailand to get to rural Thailand and whatnot. So she arrived at the hospital on about the 4th or 5th day of this ordeal. And as I talk about in my TED Talk, ultimately, she was the source of huge inspiration and change for me at that moment. What I attest really my full recovery to was her coming into my hospital room every single day, rather than being afraid and crying and depressed as I was, which ultimately she actually was as well, but she was hiding that emotion from me when crying in the hallways of the hospital. But she would come into my room every day with a smile on her face and an air of positivity, and kind of daring me to dream about the future, saying, what do you want to do when you get out of here? Yes, this is bad now, but we're going to move past this, almost in a Buddhist or meditative way of, hey, this too will change as well, slowly. So let's already start telegraphing a positive future on the other side of this. And she ultimately really challenged me to set a goal for myself on the other side of this accident, which for me was very hard. I felt like she was, not understanding how bad it was, which, again, she totally understood, but she was just trying to get me to think positive. And, I said, fine, well, if I could do anything after this, I would complete a triathlon, which in my mind was something an able-bodied, strong, healthy person could do, and not something that I had ever done before. And so that became my goal for the next, year and a half. That's what I woke up and thought about every single day through my recovery, which was long and hard. 3 months out into this, I was flown back to the United States, and I still hadn't taken a single step. I was carried on and off the plane, placed in a wheelchair when I got home, and still in my mind, I was like, all right, somehow one day, I don't know if it's a year from now, I don't know if it's 10 years from now, but I'm somehow going to one day complete a triathlon. And so as I literally learned how to walk, one step at a time, as I describe in my TED Talk, taking that first step out of the wheelchair, my mom placing a chair from our kitchen table in front of us, and, celebrating the first step in 3 months, and then the second step in, 6 months. And from there, it went on like that until so the punchline of this chapter is, fast forward 18 months, I've relearned how to walk a little bit, enough so that I can walk and a little bit jog. And I finally had taken a job in Chicago in finance, just trying to get my life back on track a little bit, as I was somewhat self-sufficient again, to be able to move my body just in the basic way. So I decided to sign up for the Chicago Triathlon, and try to honor that goal. And so I trained as hard as I possibly could that summer, and the race day came around, which was one day, or like I said, 18 months after my injury, and I signed up to race the Chicago Triathlon. And, finished the race, which for me was this joyful event to have proven that I could overcome this really bad obstacle and swim a mile and bike 25 miles and run 6.2 miles. And biking and running was not anything I'd ever done, but there was still, a huge surprise in store for me that day, which was not only had I finished the race, but I actually had won the entire Chicago Triathlon, placing first out of 4,200 and some other participants on the day, which was, like I said, surely a huge surprise to me. My goal was just to finish the race, and here I had won, the largest triathlon by participation numbers in the United States that year. So,
I remember driving to work listening to the TED Talk a few weeks ago, and I think I was stopped at traffic lights when you were talking about just that part, and I was waiting to hear that you finished the triathlon and you completed it, and then you said you won. I was like, this guy, he's a bit of a high achiever, I think, here. So that obviously, that journey must have been a huge release, such an emotional, probably, culmination when you did all of that, not only taking part in completing it, winning it. Was there kind of this euphoric, I can do anything sort of thing coming out of that? Or what was do you remember even how you felt just around then?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for me, it was definitely a joyous moment, and the win certainly surprised the heck out of me. But even more so than the win, it was just the finishing and just the sort of commitment to this goal, and it allowed me a moment of time of reflection. One, relief of feeling like I had overcome this obstacle, or this was kind of like the final chapter in overcoming this obstacle. Obviously, this I'd been fighting to get my, self back into a physical and honestly an emotionally positive headspace for 18 months. And it was just, like I said, it was this incredible lesson from my mother that I feel like she bestowed on me, which was this ability to believe in the positive mindset. And really that's, what, again, not to keep bringing up my TED Talk, but you're mentioning it. The topic is change your mindset and achieve anything. And even as I'm sure we'll talk about the world records and whatnot in a little bit, but even in that moment, it was this amazing gift that my mom gave me, because I looked back and there was these two really very divergent paths. One was to continue in this negative headspace that I was in, going through this trauma, this depression. And again, it would have been very easy for my mother to come there and cry with me and be scared with me. And ultimately, I'm not sure I would have recovered from this injury. I'm not sure I'd be, fully walking and mobile again right now. And I certainly don't think emotionally I would have recovered from it. I think I would have gone through life afraid and scared of what might happen and the tragedies that can befall all of us. But instead, having this, positive mindset and this aspirational goal that I embraced ultimately with her, guidance. Yeah. Led to this incredible outcome, which made me feel like I don't think that I'm, any better or different than any other person. And the message that I try to bestow on others is like, hey, look, like I'm just like a normal guy. But I put in the hours and work and dedication to a goal that I really cared about. Now, your goal might not be triathlon. Your goal might not be climbing mountains. It might not be anything athletic. It could be work, business, family, relationships, whatever that is. But having a positive mindset, believing in yourself, working towards it every single day, whatever that outcome is of happiness and achievement and success, I believe that we are all capable of doing that. And those outcomes, I believe, all live not in the external world, but more so in our own internal dialogue and positivity within us that can radiate and unlock potential.
Yeah, no, it's a great story. I think if we were to end the podcast now, that's a really good 1% better tip that I think people could take on board. A couple of questions on that, and I know we're moving through things, but your mum's positivity, has she always been a positive person? Was this something that she had, or where did she get that from, or is it innate in, within her, do you think, that she brought this to kind of your advantage?
It's funny. She jokes now. I know several people have interviewed her for various media over the course of this period of time and hearing this story. And her line that I think is pretty spot on is she says, as a mother, she says, careful what you wish for when you tell your kids they can achieve anything. And she's saying that tongue in cheek as a joke. Yeah. But the truth is, she is an optimist. And from a very young age, I didn't grow up with a lot of money or resources. She was super young when she had me. She was, 23 when she had me, but I'm her youngest child. So she had kids very young. And, even despite that, and even despite not having very many resources or being able to buy new things or anything like that, she still kind of bestowed on us this mentality of this world is what you make it. And I don't know exactly where that comes from within her, but it certainly has something that has trickled down to me, not, of course, in a very intense way in this moment in the hospital room in Thailand, but really as a function throughout my entire life around, for me, again, my canvas in a lot of ways has been sport, but, it wasn't like a lot of my peers or people I grew up with in my neighborhood were ending up at Yale University, swimming, at that level or something like that. And that was still a function of like, hey, you want to go to the best university in the world? Great. Study hard. Like you want to be an elite level athlete? Great. Practice hard, So it was definitely this belief that you could achieve anything, but also I think underlying that was a belief that it also is a process to get there. So not we can achieve anything, just, put it out there and it'll hit you over the head. It was like, okay, we can achieve anything, dream as big as you possibly can dream, which I love, this sort of aspirational piece. Yeah. But then she also zeroes back in on that and says, okay, now what's the process of getting there? Yeah. And I think that is a piece that is often missed. People say, well, I want to be a millionaire. And it's like, okay, I absolutely believe you can do that. Like, what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to work towards to get there? Why are you passionate about this? When things get hard, what's going to make you keep pushing towards that goal? And so, again, as I talk about a little bit the TED Talk. It's about those small steps to reach that larger goal, and the dedication to that process. And so, yeah, her positivity has definitely shined through me throughout my entire life, and it's had a dramatic impact on my mentality in the world for sure.
Yeah, and I think positivity can become a habit as well, you know, that if you constantly look on the positive and, you know, like anything over a period of 21 days or 30 days or whatever they say to form that habit, it does start growing, and it's a snowball effect in some ways as well. I certainly find that from talking to other people and just even in my own life. So that's great. And just to your other point, early on you were talking about having that natural talent and ability when you were growing up, that you somewhat, you know, said, yeah, it was great, you were good at school, good at a sport, but it's very apparent now from what you're talking about is that that's all well and good that you can have that, but without having that dedication and discipline and ability to put in the hard hours, you know, you may not achieve what you set out to achieve, right?
Absolutely. And it, you know, obviously we've been focusing somewhat on this talk on the successes that I've had, and I've, you know, had my fair share of wins for sure, but there have been countless setbacks and countless losses and countless failures in my life as well. And, you know, on the path to getting there. And of course, looking back, I see those the same way I see the burn accident as a catalyst for ultimately a huge amount of success. I don't think I would be a 2-time world record holder had I not almost killed myself in a fire, which is a ironic thing. But, you know, there's been also tiny little, not as dramatic, but many other small failures along the way as well. That, again, that positive mindset is crucial in those times, because you can either say, I heard a quote recently. I mean, I don't know who it was from, but you might know, but it is something like, I never lose. I either win or I learn. That's a mentality, right? That's a saying, hey, I failed today. What can I learn from it? How can I take this? How can I move forwards and be better because of that? That's I think it might actually be your boy Conor McGregor, right? That said that.
Well, Conor might have taken it from somebody else. Tony Robbins jumps into mind as well, and the whole success is 99% failure and all of that. But it's all true. You know, it definitely is true. Yeah.
And that's just, I mean, that again, that's a mindset. And again, even back to meditation, it's you can sit there on a meditation mat with your mind racing and your back hurting, and you can say, oh God, I'm not meditating well, and my back hurts, and all these external things. Or you can sit there and say, my back hurts right now. How interesting, right? And observe that. And that's the same exact sensation being observed differently in your mind. So it's the same thing with a failure. You could say, oh, I lost this race today, or, oh, I didn't get the job promotion I wanted today. I'm such a failure. I suck. I'm not worth anything, or whatever. Or you could say, oh, wow, I didn't get the job promotion this time. I wonder what it's going to take for me to get it next time then. What are the things I can do to work towards that? And learn from that process. So,
I just, on my previous episode that I just released there, it was a small kind of a solo effort one. And I was listening to, have you heard of Jocko Willink?
Yes, recently, someone was recently telling me that guy is intense.
He's intense, but he did a little clip that I actually put in my last show. I shouldn't have, but I did. But it's really, I'm bigging up his show in it. But he talks about problems, and like every time somebody comes to him with a problem, he says, "Good, this is a problem. Oh, I've lost my job. Good, I didn't get the promotion. Good." It's all opportunity to get better, and it's really cool. And the way he delivers it is just amazingly motivational. But I hear you. Just one last question before we go on to the challenge and the creation of Beyond 7.2. So with the accident, it was a turning point. Yeah. But sometimes but people in general move forward and don't maybe realize how lucky they are to have what they have, and they lose that perspective of that kind of massive turning point. Is there a way you can keep it in perspective, that sometimes when you are struggling up a mountain, that you say, I'm so good here, I'm able to do this?
Yes, I understand the question. I mean, to me, it boils down to two things. One, first and foremost, I think gratitude is incredibly important in our lives and powerful. And I try to carry that with me every single day. So, and contrast is also powerful, right? So if say I'm in the mountains, that doesn't necessarily mean I'm setting a world record, but I'm in the mountains near my house, or just even going for a walk or whatever. I try to remember and say, wow, like I have so much gratitude right now for even being able to be out here and move my body, to be out here and walk, to be able to, breathe this fresh air right now. And to me, that comes from, having almost lost all of the ability to do those things. And then the other thing from a sort of almost mental toughness side is there are times, particularly say setting these world records where I'm up on, near the summit of Mount Everest, it's minus 40 degrees, you can't breathe, like, you certainly self-doubt starts to trickle in. And then I have this, way of switching into, this is bad, but I felt worse.
Yeah.
I have experienced something more traumatic. I have experienced something harder. And so, again, like I said, I may not be a 2-time world record holder had I not been burned, because in a strange way, it's given me a level of sort of mental toughness or recalibration of what we can endure as humans. And I say this often, which is, I hope that you or anyone listening doesn't get severely burned in a fire. That's not the recipe for success, and having to go through that trauma. But A, you can sort of learn from me, and the B, we all do go through trauma in our life. That's the human condition in some respect. It might not be physical trauma, but you mentioned the death of a family member or a close friend or anything. We go through setbacks and challenges and failures and whatnot, and so being grateful in the moments of positivity, I think is hugely important, and also having that contrast of I think impermanence as well, like that feeling of like when something's hard, it's like, this is really hard, but this is probably not going to last forever. And it might last a while. It might last a month. A depression could last years, whatnot. But this doesn't have to be the constant state that we're in, because life is ever changing and evolving. And look, I was listening to Tim Ferriss' podcast recently, and he said something like, hey, look, I don't just jump out of bed every single day and karate top ninja like the mental demons. Like, look, I'm the same. Like, I have my moments. I'm not perfect, far from, but these are things that I try to sort of, when I do get down that negative spiral, draw myself back in with these moments of gratitude, positivity, and a contrast of something of what is hard and what I've gone through and what we are capable of enduring and getting through with positivity.
Yeah, and I think the mindfulness and meditation in there makes you aware of those things much quicker, and you don't kind of get into the spiral of giving yourself a hard time, which could last for minutes, hours, days, or whatever. Once you're aware of it and maybe less reactive, I find anyway that's a big benefit.
I would agree with that for sure. Yeah, for sure.
So you did 50 full-blown Ironman triathlons, right, for the next few years in your career.
Yeah, so I raced triathlon professionally. I raced all the distances from Ironman down to the Olympic distance circuit. I actually focused predominantly on the Olympic distance circuit because my goal for quite a while was to make the Olympics. And again, we could mention this as one of my failures or one of my lessons learned, which is I ultimately did not make the Olympics, and that had been my goal from a long time as a kid as a swimmer, and then reignited that goal as a triathlete in hopes of making the Olympics. So yeah, a lot of my focus actually was on the Olympic distance triathlon, which again is slightly shorter but different rules and governed by the Olympic Committee. But I raced all the distances professionally. I have no idea how many professional races, but more than 50 for sure, probably 70 or 80 professional races over the course of 6 years. I raced in 25 countries, 6 different continents, representing the United States all over the world and living all over the world as a result of that. And it was a really amazing and unique life experience, to say the least.
Yeah, no, definitely sounds like a great way to see the world as well when you're running around and cycling and swimming. Were you competing again with the UK, the Brownlee brothers? Were they in that same discipline, same distance?
Exactly, that's exactly what they compete in. And then I know some of the Irishmen, Brian Keane. I don't know if that's a name that's familiar to you or
familiar,
any of the listeners, but he made the Olympics this year. In 2016, I should say.
I think he's from Cork as well, that guy, or Kerry, because that's where I'm from. I think he's I think he's
that
from
sounds right. Yeah. So he's awesome. Haven't seen him in years, but I was a good friend and raced against him many, many times. It's interesting. It's a very international circuit. Obviously, everyone's trying to make the Olympics, and each country can send 2 to 3 participants, depending on the world ranking, to the Olympics. but it ends up becoming this kind of weird family where you're traveling around the world competing against each other. And of course, as you're competing, you're trying to rip each other's throats out and win races. But all of the rest of the time, you're on this kind of traveling circus together. So there's a lot of camaraderie between competitors and countries and whatnot. So you ultimately end up becoming really good friends with a lot of people out there, and met, wonderful people from around the world. And now that I'm not competing, they continue, of course, they live on as friendships and not as adversaries on the race course.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's really cool. So look, I know we're 45 minutes in. I'm conscious of time. I don't want to eat into your morning too much, but I definitely want to talk about the challenge. So when you finished your professional triathlete career, while you were doing it, I guess, was there an idea forming? Was there other plans coming, and did it all culminate or come towards the summits and the poles? Was that what was in your mind?
Yeah, in 2014, I, again, was still racing triathlon at the time, and racing triathlon at a very high level. In fact, I had just won a professional half Ironman race, which was great, and I was 29 at the time. The peak age for triathlon, quite honestly, is actually a little bit older than that. So it's, mid to late 30s, often, particularly for Ironman triathlon. And so there was a pathway for me to continue racing professionally for many more years. I had solid sponsorship, and that was sort of the pathway it looked like I was headed down. But I kind of had this feeling after racing, professionally for 5 or 6 years of kind of like, I've done this. Like the chapter, at least for me, felt somewhat complete. And I was kind of sitting with myself and thinking, but what do I value? And one was, I still super value being an athlete, and being an elite athlete and pushing my body to, extreme heights, both physically and I suppose, or both literally and metaphorically, in this case. But also I felt like I felt called to do something sort of greater than myself. I felt that at some point, the triathlon path was, I don't want to say self-serving because that takes away from other people's journey, but it felt, very much for me. I was racing and I was either winning or losing, and, the sponsors would be happy or they'd be disappointed. And it kind of ended there. And again, I wouldn't take it back for anything. And that's not to diminish my experience or anyone else's experience as a professional athlete, because it's an incredible gift to do that. Yeah. But I felt called to see if I could somehow then combine what I was doing as an athlete to create something larger than myself. And I had always been passionate about the mountains, far from a professional mountaineer. And certainly when I went out in the world and told people that I thought I could set the world record for the 7 Summits and Explorers Grand Slam, people thought I was pretty crazy, and it wasn't going to work out very well for me. But I was super passionate about that goal. And in a greater sense, I was passionate about using, I thought that if I'm out in the world setting this, pretty dramatic world record, that there would be a media component to what I was doing and a storytelling arc that could have value beyond my own personal success or failure. And so my fiance, Jenna Bisa, myself, we dedicated pretty much our whole life to this project. And long before I was able to actually set off on this expedition, it was crafting this project and in the idea of inspiring kids to get outside and move their body, live active and healthy lives. And there's a huge wellness component to that in terms of, nutrition and diet and whatnot. And again, this wasn't me trying to convince kids around the country and world to, climb Mount Everest. It was more so, catching their attention by this dramatic world record story, and the overcoming obstacle piece of my personal narrative of, being burned in a fire, for them to think about sort of their own goals and their own lives. And I have a fundamental belief that no matter what goal you set, and that again could be an academic, we ask kids, what's your Everest? And they say, oh, my Everest is to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, or, my Everest is to be a concert pianist one day or whatever. These young kids, with huge goals and dreams. I love that about young kids right there. They dare to dream. And in adulthood, we too often lose that naivete, I suppose. But I believe even through adulthood, we should just dare to dream huge and go after our dreams. But that was really what this project was foundationally built upon, and that was amazing. And we can definitely get into the details of the world record itself and the process of high achievement there. But for me, the greatest joy has come from being able to do something myself that I'm very proud of, but doing that for a larger purpose. And ultimately, with the partnerships we formed with other nonprofits and the formation of our own nonprofit, we were able to reach, and I continue to talk to kids, but we were able to reach, hundreds of thousands of kids in various different mediums and ways. And, you have teachers bring this story into the classroom, as I was literally live blogging and Snapchatting from the summit of Everest and all these places, and really telling this story in real time, and inspiring kids to think about their own lives and to think about a world outside of the narrow world that we sometimes get caught in, and that there's a whole world out there of adventure and exploration, and health, wellness, etc. I could go into more detail, but that's kind of that was kind of the vision and dream behind Beyond 7-2.
Cool. And one thing I touch on, you mentioned your values, right? And there's probably a side question to normal questions you might get, but one of the things I do, I'm kind of a coach as well, outside of my day job, and professional business coach, and I think identifying what your core value set help massively with your decision making going forward and what you want to do in your life. And I very few people that I've talked to that actually really have a clear view of what their values are or were, or go through an exercise or a process of identifying them. So it sounded like after you finished the triathlons, as you were forming this, you did something around looking at what those were. Were they something that you were very aware of all along, or did you have an approach to identify what they were and how they sat with you?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. For me, there was no specific methodology to forming that. It's something I'm certainly thinking about constantly and reevaluating, as I go. I do have a practice, again, sort of passed down to me from my parents, who do this every year. But every year at the beginning of the year, I, sit down and write down goals for the year. And then I also review the goals from the previous year. And sometimes those goals are really short term, like, I don't know, some small little thing that I want to accomplish in the next week, maybe. And some of those are multi-year goals. Hey, in 10 years, I want to, move towards this, outcome. Yeah. And so I kind of give myself the freedom to write those goals. And so when I'm evaluating those goals, I'm also saying, oh, did I achieve that little small term thing? Or I'm like, oh, am I moving towards this larger thing? And is this larger goal still a part of my core value? Should I include that again on this year's goal setting, or am I not working towards that long-term, outcome at this point? So that's been a way, just as a life. I also journal frequently throughout my entire life, of just sort of, self-reflection in that way. But particularly as Beyond 7-2 was forming, coincidentally, it was also when I got engaged to Jenna. We were in the mountains in Ecuador. I had just finished up racing for the year, and we went and climbed a few mountains together. Yeah. And I asked her to marry me on the summit of Ecuador's third tallest mountain at almost 19,000 feet, which was of course a joyous moment for me, but also a moment of life transition, of really taking that next step of commitment in our relationship. So it kind of, we posed to ourselves the question of, well, what do we want life together to look like? Again, we had been together for many years, and she had been out on the road with me with triathlon for 5+ years. We actually met on that trip right before I was burned. So we met, more than 10 years ago. So we've been together quite a long time. But as you're obviously thinking about marriage and the next phase of life, allows us to kind of ask that question, well, what do you want to, life to look like, and whatever. And that allowed us to evaluate our core values together, which ultimately spawned this project. But it's funny, someone pointed, I'm a big believer in this. And I'm sure as a coach for you, you have many methodologies for kind of pulling this out of people. But one that I've found that's super simple is to ask people to journal or write down the 5 happiest days that they can remember in their entire life. It may seem like a simple exercise, but once you start diving deeper, you're like, my 5 happiest days, what does that look like? And then when you get those 5 written down, there's something interesting that comes up, which is you can start to see patterns in, well, what are the types of things that make me happy? Are the days that make me happy, are they success or achievement driven? So you could say my happiest day was the day that I, graduated from this great university or got this great job or whatever, whereas somebody else might write my 5 happiest days. And it might be like, oh, I was on this family vacation, and then I was spending this really intimate time with this loved one, and I was doing this. And it's like, oh, wow, your core values are actually around family and community and whatever. And again, there's no right answer to this question, but if you write down your 5 happiest days, you might just start to see some patterns in what your core values are. And thus, if your core values are around spending more quality time with your family, yet all you're thinking about is your career and you don't have enough time to spend with your family, you might reevaluate, oh, like, am I living in alignment with my core values? Maybe not. And that's the time to reevaluate that. So anyway, something I think about certainly a lot, and it sounds like you do as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's another angle of that technique is one I hadn't heard before. I have a few different ones we've talked about, others, and actually a guy interviewed recently around artificial intelligence. He's wrote a couple of books about it. He's done a TED talk as well. His name is John Havens, but he wrote a book about human personal values and how artificial intelligence might actually make us evaluate what our values are more. Just in relation to the summits and the whole, what it was, 160 days, was it, or 169 days, or one?
So the Guinness Book of World Record just published my record. The book just came out. It's fun to see my name in there.
Cool.
But the official time was 138 days, 5 hours and 5 minutes, I believe. So I usually say 139 days just to round up and make it easy. But that was for the Explorers Grand Slam, which was, again, the climbing the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents and going to the North and South Pole. And then also for the 7 summits, it was a week shorter than that. So it was 131 days. So yeah, this is basically started at the South Pole expedition. So dragging a sled across the last degree of latitude, minus 40, minus 50 degrees every single day until I reached the South Pole. And then continued onward from there. I won't name every single mountain, but essentially a nonstop journey. I would finish one expedition and get on a plane and fly to the next one without, stopping or resting in between it all. And at the fewer than 50 people at that time had even completed the Grand Slam, and most of those people do so over the course of 5, 10, 15 years as a sort of lifetime legacy project where you'd train for one of these big expeditions and hopefully complete it and then go home and regroup and train for the next one next year. And so instead of taking that approach, I was literally doing these 9 expeditions back to back nonstop without stopping anything in between. Literally just my only rest I would get sometimes would be coming off a mountain, getting on a plane and sleeping on that plane, and getting off the plane and starting to climb again. So it was an intense and nonstop, 4.5 months or whatever it was, but incredible moment to stand on top of the final mountain, having set 2 new world records and really, kind of pushed beyond my own perceived limits, and hopefully inspired many others, and particularly kids in the process of what we were doing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's such an amazing achievement. So congratulations around it. Like, as you said, what was the previous record for that? It's in months rather than, or months longer, I guess, or years, was it?
Yeah, so the record previous to that was 197 days. Okay. So I took just over 2 months off of it. And that's a British guy by the name of Richard Parks, whose record that I broke. But he had done it, I think that then the third fastest person is like well over a year, right. At the time. And there's, a couple, I think now there have been me, him, and 2 other women who have done it, in under a year, total. So, not a lot of people have, done all those in the same one climbing season. And of course, as you can probably imagine, there's crazy logistical hurdles, to juggle, between that, as well as specific weather windows on some of these mountains, and it's not like you can just show up at Everest anytime and there's 1 week in May where you can really be on the summit of that mountain, and so having to kind of play with all the logistics and how they interact with each other in different expeditions is quite a puzzle to solve, to say the least.
Yeah. And do you remember, obviously with the mental toughness, I know you've obviously got through it, but was there parts on it that were standout low points that you couldn't see the next steps, or was there any major challenges that was almost to the point of breaking?
Yeah. I mean, like you said, we're almost an hour in the podcast. I could give you another 5 hours on the moments that were, really tough and stressful and all of that. I'll give you a quick
couple of standout maybe ones. Yeah.
One thing I should point out is just getting to the start line of this project was an incredible hurdle. In a lot of ways, I don't want to say the biggest hurdle, but a huge hurdle. We didn't have any, sponsorship support to do this. Again, I wasn't a professional mountaineer, so I didn't have any sort of standing in this community. We needed to raise a significant amount of money to do it, as well as with our charitable goals. And so there was 18 months of blood, sweat, and tears and working that went into this with both Jen and I. And of course, we're not, getting paid anything to do it. It was just a complete passion project. Sure. But we ended up spending, oftentimes 100 hours a week just diving into this and asking as many people as we can for support, and having hundreds of people slam the door in our face and say, no, there's no way you can achieve this. It's not possible. And so that piece of it, just from a nonprofit venture, but an entrepreneurial standpoint of building an idea and taking an idea and turning it into reality, was in itself, that in itself could be its own podcast on hustle and grind and grit and perseverance and failure and setbacks. But so that stands out. And then during the course of the actual record itself, there's some big moments. I fell waist deep into a crevasse in Russia, and so I'm up there unroped on this mountain, and ultimately fell into a crevasse and was able to pull myself out, luckily without going too deep. But a very, very scary moment, and a moment that certainly made me reevaluate why I was doing this and if I should continue. Being on Mount Everest, I actually had to make 2 summit attempts on Everest. And the first time I got up above the death zone, which is above 26,000 feet, going towards the summit, and got caught out in a massive storm. And had to, spend almost 2 hours just putting up my tent to get in to survive. And that, made me very scared of how powerful this mountain was. And I could see very clearly how people get into trouble and often die on Everest. Ultimately, I was successfully summited Mount Everest a few days after that, and I was climbing with just myself and a Sherpa by the name of Pasang Bodhi, but 3 people did die on Everest and Lhotse on that same night that I was up there. And again, those were not people that I was climbing with or who I knew personally, but certainly puts into perspective the risks and the dangers of being out there, knowing that on the same day and the same conditions that I was out there, that people were doing the exact same thing as me, and ultimately didn't come home from that. So there was very, very intense moments like that. And on a slightly more lighthearted note, and again, since you've heard my TED Talk, you heard me mention this, but coming down from the summit of Everest, I'm exhausted. It's my 8th of the 9 expeditions. I only have 1 expedition to go, and at this point I'm about 2 months ahead of the schedule. And so I'm thinking, great, I can rest a little bit and then go climb Denali, hopefully successfully, and set this record. And I'm back down on Camp 4 on Everest, and Jenna, I call her on the sat phone, and she obviously is my huge partner in all of this, and she's running all the logistics and media, and she's in a lot of ways, I say she had the harder job than me. I just had to climb the mountains, but she's running this huge project on the back end. And she says to me, hey, we've been doing some calculations, and it just so happens that if you can summit Denali in the next week, you're not going to set not 1 but 2 world records, because the 7 summits record had become possible. And I was like, well, what is that going to take? And she's like, well, and I say this line in my TED Talk, she says, I need you to put your boots back on and climb all the way back down to base camp right now. We're going to arrange a helicopter to take you from base camp to Kathmandu. No time to sleep in a hotel, take a shower or anything like that, but there's going to be an evening flight that'll take you to Dubai, Seattle, and Anchorage, and then you'll have about 3 days to climb Denali. I know Denali normally takes 3 weeks to climb, but if you can do all of that, and again, this is not just coming off of Everest, the tallest mountain in the world, but this is coming off of 7 other previous expeditions as well. I'm completely shattered and exhausted, but also intrigued, I'll say the least. So, long story long, I did successfully, execute her plan. Somehow I made it over there just 100 hours after standing on the summit of Everest. I'm climbing in Alaska up Denali, up at this final summit, and get caught out in a big storm there as well. So again, I'm rambling on and on. I can tell you all the stories, but it's there was, again, almost in a daily level, some crazy setback or moment where I'm going, what the heck am I doing out here? Why am I doing this? But in truth, although I definitely took some pretty massive risks to accomplish this, if I'm being honest, one of the things that certainly kept me pushing forwards in these times was having this bigger purpose. I think had it been just me trying to set these world records, of course, I have some innate dedication and drive to persevere for my own self. But there was something really special knowing that, there was all of these kids out there in these school districts that were following along this story every single day and checking on the blog and sending us little video clips about their own goals and their own dreams. And in those moments, like being out on the storm in Everest and having to go down and being really solemn, a lot of people were like, oh, well, that's it. Your Everest expedition is over. This world record is over. And I was like, no, I need to figure out a way to get back up there. And a lot of that drive came from not wanting to let those others down or continue to be, this inspiration and show it was possible. The mountains ultimately, it's up to the mountains and the weather gods or whatever to really give you safe passage on a mountain. So on some level, you can't completely fight, Mother Nature. And I always knew this, but I had a dedication that I was going to try absolutely as hard as I possibly could to get up these mountains and to be successful. And it was great to have a larger purpose really driving me throughout it all.
Yeah, it really stands out. Purpose, passion, and your values. And when they're kind of all mixed together, I think it certainly motivates and kind of drives you on. But I think, from a pattern that I hear from other people when they find and touch upon those, it makes things, if you boil it down, it makes it simple, but it's not always that easy to find what the purpose is or what the values are. But no, fair play to you. I'm going to let you go in a minute. I just want to, just 3 quick ones. Fear, how do you deal with fear? Or is fear a word you're familiar with, and do you have it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yes, fear is definitely something I'm familiar with. Like I said before, I'm just a regular guy. I'm human, just like everyone else. I put my pants on one leg at a time, just like every other person out there.
And go out and make gold records, then, just like that.
Yeah. Fear is something that I think we all can relate to in some capacity. And again, I think it is. Like I described before, it's something that ultimately is external, and it's how we internalize that. Look, when you're standing on the side of a huge mountain, or there's on the summit ridge of Everest, for example, you're walking on this tiny little narrow passage called the Corniche Traverse, and you're literally looking down, 5, maybe 10,000 feet at certain points. One step to the side of you, you fall 10,000 feet into China and the Tibetan side, and the other side of the ridge, you fall, 10,000 feet down into Nepal, and you're walking on this tiny little precarious ridge, completely out of breath. If you're not a little bit scared in that moment, I think there's something wrong with you, to be perfectly honest. So, fear is something that's ever present, but it's also, I'm aware of the fact that fear is something that can cripple us. And fear comes in many forms. Of course, it's easy to point to fear of heights, as I just mentioned, but, even in a more metaphorical sense, fear of failure. Strangely enough, I think fear of success is something that people struggle with constantly. What actually is going to happen if I am successful with this? And so fear, I think, shows up for us in a lot of different ways. And again, it's, I equate it to that sort of that voice or that negative self-talk. But it's a natural thing, right? The fear that's coming up in us is arising from a sort of primal fight or flight or survival type of state. And so, the other word or concept that's important in discussing with fear, I believe, is risk or risk management, which is hugely important as well in any venture. There's fear and pushing through fears, and then there's doing things completely recklessly, right? And just having no regard for health, safety of yourself or others. And so I do think that that's a really healthy balance, and that line is different for different people, of course, and it's how we react to that. But ultimately, I don't know if I'm meant to be giving advice, but if I was going to give advice around fear, it was to have a healthy relationship with fear is the way that I like to describe it, which is to understand fear, to be able to say, what am I feeling? Oh, I'm feeling afraid right now. This scares me. And then being able to do an assessment, which is am I afraid right now because I really should be afraid and I should back away from this? Let me tell you, on these mountains, there was, although I ultimately successfully summited all of them, there was 3 or 4 times that I did turn around on mountains because I was afraid, or the weather conditions weren't right, or there was something wasn't right about the day. And I turned around, went down to the bottom, and regrouped. And so that is the sort of risk management assessment side of what I'm talking about, which is how do you make decisions with fear, not because of the fear, but take into account the fear and sort of put that through a lens of risk management and the outcomes and the success risk reward equation, and then push through it. So yeah,
it's a good one, and so many things come up even on that I won't ask you, because like I'm fascinated about intuition and when you talk about risks, that there's a decision making around that. We could maybe at a later point in a few years we maybe get back together.
Round two.
Yeah. This second last one, you touched on it. Success. How do you define success, or what is success for you through your lens?
Yeah, success is in some words a loaded word, right? So I think that we too often define success by other people's metrics of success, or what our culture or society deems as success. We generally think of successful as, wealthy or high achieving or whatnot. And, for me, success, I think, is defined a little bit more on an internal standpoint, which is, to me, it's about happiness, or even a deeper level of happiness, which I would say is contentment. That's how I define success myself. And then understanding what makes you feel that way, and striving towards that. I believe, and again, it's maybe a well-worn and trite platitude at this point, but it really, when I look back on this great journey that I was on, it was so much more the journey than it was the destination. Yes, standing on that final mountain and setting 2 world records was an amazing feeling, don't get me wrong, but it was fleeting as well, right? Yeah. And if I didn't enjoy the process of coming up with this idea and spending countless hours with Jenna over 18 months planning this idea and battling through the setbacks, and then taking that first step off the plane in the South Pole and dragging my sled there, if I didn't appreciate all of those steps, like that 1 minute that I stood on the top of the mountain, a newly crowned world record holder, is like that's not success. Success is if you come back, with lessons learned and a greater appreciation for, the people around you and who you love. But I also don't want to have success defined for me. I don't try to define success for others. And so whatever that is, and that even kind of comes back to those core values. There's nothing wrong with high achievement, in my opinion. In fact, I'm fascinated by it, and it's certainly something that I've strived for very much in my life, of high performing and setting audacious goals and achieving them. But I think that we have to be a little bit careful when we define success by external parameters rather than internal feelings. And I'll make one last mountain analogy, but that was, like I said, I mentioned weather before. No one summited Mount Everest in 2014 or 2015. In 2014, there was a huge avalanche that unfortunately killed 16 Sherpas and ultimately closed the entire mountain on the Nepal side that year. Right. And then in 2015, Everest was hit by a huge earthquake, not only closing the climbing season, but of course devastated, the entire country and left 10,000 people in Nepal dead. Terrible tragedy. If either of those things had happened during my world record project in 2016, I would not have been quote unquote successful in setting these 2 world records. Yeah. But those 2 events that I just mentioned are so far outside of my control. Like, I don't control if there's a terrible, tragedy on a mountain, or a huge, natural disaster like an earthquake. Like, that is so far outside of my control. What I can control is that I created a project and tried my entire self. Would I have been terribly disappointed if that had happened after all the hard work that I have put in? Yes. Would that have made me an unsuccessful person? No, I went for it. I tried. I set an audacious goal, and I gave it my very best effort. And ultimately that ended up with me having this conversation with you as a world record holder. But success shouldn't be defined by that, and certainly should not be defined by things well outside of our control, as it too often is. Yeah.
No, good one. As I said, I asked that to everybody, and I just am fascinated by the different views. And nobody yet has said monetary, but I think they're probably afraid to say it on the show anyway. So during our conversation, you talked about chapters. What's the next chapter for Colin? I'm sure, knowing the type of personality you are and what drives you, there's bound to be something new on the horizon that you're building towards or want to challenge yourself towards.
No, I'm done. I'm just, I'm here in my house. I've kicked my feet up on the couch. I'm getting fat.
Watching Game of Thrones and stuff like that. Yeah.
Netflix binge show watching and hanging out.
That's it. You're successful now.
Exactly.
You're successful, so it's done.
I'm at the top.
Yeah.
No, quite the opposite. For me, this is again, this has been an incredible chapter, and there will be many more in my life. I thrive on the process. I mentioned this question that I asked to school kids and ultimately asked to many others at this point as well. In my, corporate public speaking and various things that I do, is sharing this story. Is, I ask other people, what's your Everest? And sometimes people say to me, well, it's great. Now you've climbed Everest, but what's your Everest now? And I love that question because the question it means that, of course, I haven't just reached some pinnacle that I'm just sitting on top of and going to rest on my laurels. For me, the process of getting after it is what I thrive in. And so for me, I'm going to be coy and just say that there are several big endurance projects that are on the horizon for me that I'm will be setting out on in the next few years that I'm planning for. And I'm really excited to launch those publicly when I get the chance. So that's a huge part of what I'm doing. But also, this has been an incredible blessing. Like I said, I really started Beyond 7.2 to not only set this personal goal, but to be able to share this story with others. And it's been amazing the amount of forums that I've been invited into over the past year to share this story. Obviously, sharing it as a TED Talk where you encountered this, but in the many other avenues, whether with school kids or in the corporate setting, it has been amazing. So I've been loving, at this current chapter, being able to actually share this story and share some of the wisdom that I was able to hopefully impart on others throughout this process. So part of what I'm doing right now is really is having the opportunity to share this story. I'm working on a book, working on some other media formats to share this story, which has been really fun for me, while also planning for some other big projects in the future. One tiny little one that is coming up for me next month is a fun little project that I'm doing. It's called 29029. The word 0 is written out. You can look up the website for anyone who's listening. But it's this guy, a successful entrepreneur by the name of Jesse Itzler. He's planning this event. So 29029 is the altitude in feet of Mount Everest from sea level. And he has invited a couple hundred people to the ski mountain in Vermont before the ski season starts to climb, quote unquote, Everest. So essentially climb the ski mountain 17 times in a row until reaching the altitude of Mount Everest. And hopefully I'm going to try to hopefully do it continuously without stopping. Although it's not like a serious race. It's more just to see if we can all kind of, again, set a big goal and go after it. But it's calling it 29029 Everesting. So climbing the altitude in one push or over the course of a weekend. So that's again, as a fun endurance project. And I love his spirit in choosing these fun kind of crazy endurance challenges, because I think the camaraderie that comes from the couple hundred people that I'll share that moment with, again, it's the same exact thing that we've been talking about. It might be a random goal to see if you can climb the altitude of Everest on a ski mountain in Vermont. Yeah, that's somewhat random, but ultimately, what's the essence of that? The essence of set yourself a big challenge. Obviously, people are training to be able to achieve that. Train, so embrace the process of doing that. And then hopefully get there, challenge yourself, find out something about yourself when the going gets tough or hard, and then break through those challenges and achieve it. And so for me, I'm really blessed to be invited to participate with him and his cohort of people that are doing this to see if we can all again do this fun goal. So that's coming up next month in October, the 29029 challenge. So that's a fun little one I've got on the horizon. But stay tuned for other things from me. You can anyone listening who wants to follow along, I'm on social at Colin OBrady on Instagram, Twitter, whatnot. And beyond72.com is the website, so it might be in the show notes. But a little shout out there for that.
I was just going to say, do you want to give yourself the shout out? So is there any other ways people can get in touch, or there's so much video and content online that they could read view to watch, and there's a lot of footage of the actual climbs as well, isn't there?
Yeah. There's quite a lot of footage. Check out beyond72.com, my website, and on the press page there, there's some really great pieces that people have put together. History Channel, CBS Sunday Morning, Many of the different networks, Discovery, whatnot, have all put together little, 3, 5, 8-minute pieces on the story using a bunch of the archival footage that I shot up in the mountains. And if I'm being honest, I look pretty worked at times in some of these. I'm on the Everest in the tent, freezing my butt off, talking to myself, and feeling sorry for myself in some senses. But it's some pretty gritty, raw content that's fun. Out there. So yeah, definitely check that out on my website, as well as, like I said, I'm constantly on social media, at ColinOBrady.com, just my name. And definitely check out the TED Talk, the Change Your Mindset and Achieve Anything on YouTube. TEDx Portland was a really fun event and a great way for me to share this story in that format. I do quite a bit of public speaking, and I enjoy doing that, certainly, like I said, for school kids, but also in the corporate setting. But TED is its own sort of beautiful format that I've always loved and been a fan of. So it's quite humbling and quite an honor to be invited to share this story in that format on the TED stage, which I really embraced and loved. So I invite people to check that out as well.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. It was really great talking to you, Colin. I do the odd adventure race myself. I've done a few 100k cycles. There's one coming up in a few weeks, an adventure race here in Ireland, the Quest series, and it's something like 80 kilometers. Makes me feel like I need to push harder now at this stage after talking to you for an hour. But they're great events, and as you said,
awesome.
Just getting through it and the sense of achievement, you're kind of floating for a few days afterwards, and just getting out into the great outdoors is great. So I'm going to let you go. We've gone way over, but I couldn't stop because I'm kind of gorging on all this information and great insights. So thanks so much, Colin.
My pleasure. Thanks, Rob.
Yeah, I really appreciate it, and I'll be keeping track and keeping eyes on your next steps.
All right. All the best, my friend.
Take it easy. Have a good day.
Yeah. Bye.
Cheers, man. So, how did you find it? A good show? Hopefully. Do take a second or two to let me know. And before you do dive off, just a couple of quick call-outs. The new podcast, the 864, 15 minutes long, in fact 864 seconds is the aspiration, is now out and ready for listening. Check it out on the site. Go to the podcast page. There's a link for 864 there, or go on to Apple Podcasts and subscribe. That would be awesome. The 864 is all you have to search for. And it's in all other podcast platforms that you can think of or should be. So, have a listen. Every week I release a 1 Minute Monday video clip, which is also a tip to hopefully make you 1% better. Check that out. It's on the website on the video page. Did you also know that only about 1% of listeners to podcasts, not just my own but all, leave a rating, leave a review, get in touch or give feedback? And I would love if we could buck that trend and put it to 2% for this one. So please do take the time to give me a bit of feedback, give me some ideas about future guests or whatever the hell comes into mind. Just get in touch or rate or review the podcast on Apple. That helps. I'm available at all of the social platforms, pretty much all, at Rob of the Green. That's either with or without the @ sign, but you'll find it under that moniker, so hopefully I'll hear from you there. Last couple of quick ones. Support. So I do offer some pro bono coaching. Get onto the website, the support page, to get in touch. Few hours a month, happy to do that. And if you would like to support the podcast, that would be awesome. You can do so through Patreon and also through purchasing books through the book page on the website. That goes through Amazon and we get a little percentage. I'm not even sure what, but it's something. And finally, just to say thanks for taking the time to listen to the podcast. I know there's lots of other shows out there. It means a lot that you're checking this one out. So have a great rest of day, week, month, year, whatever it may be, and hopefully you're getting 1% better as a result of these shows. Take care and good luck.